The table was set for 12, but it felt like a courtroom. I was the only one who didn't know I was on trial. My aunt had strung white lights along the mantel, the way she did every Christmas. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the house. My cousin's kids were running through the hallway, screaming about something. Everything looked exactly the way a family holiday is supposed to look. But I had learned, a long time ago, that my family was very good at making things look exactly the way they were supposed to. I was standing near the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched, when my uncle cleared his throat and said my name, not as a greeting, as a summons. I turned around. Uncle Gerald was standing at the head of the table. He was 63 years old, a retired insurance adjuster from Columbus, Ohio, and he had the kind of posture that made every room feel like a deposition. Behind him, my brother stood with his arms crossed. My sister-in-law, Renee, was sitting with her phone face down on the table, which meant she already knew what was coming. My mother was not looking at me. That was the first sign. My mother always looked at me. Even when she was angry, even when she was disappointed, she watched me the way a hawk watches something it has already decided to circle back to. But right now she was staring at the centerpiece, a cluster of pine cones and dried orange slices my aunt had put together, as if it were the most important object in the room. "Ethan," my uncle said again, "I think we need to talk about Dad's account." I set my water glass down on the counter. "Okay," I said. "What about it?" "The balance," he said. "It's gone." The room got very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens when something is said that surprises everyone. The kind of quiet that happens when something is said that surprises only one person. The kids had stopped running. Someone in the other room turned the television down. "What do you mean, gone?" I said. $41,000, my uncle said, transferred out in 6 withdrawals over the last 14 months. The last one was in September, 3 weeks before he passed. My father had died in October, a heart attack, sudden and without warning, in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Dayton. He was 67, he had been healthy, or at least we thought he had been. He never talked about money with anyone except me, because I was the one who had helped him set up his online banking account 4 years ago, and somewhere along the way that had made me the unofficial family accountant, the one who got the calls when the Medicare statement was confusing or the utility bill seemed too high. I had not known about $41,000 going anywhere. "I didn't touch that account," I said. My brother Derek made a sound, not a word, just a sound, low and short, like he was confirming something he had expected. "Derek," I said, "what is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Renee said, without looking up from the table, "that you were the only one with access. I helped him set up the login," I said. "I didn't have his password. I didn't have power of attorney. I didn't have anything. I just sat next to him one afternoon and showed him how to check his balance on his phone." "Your name is on the account," my uncle said. "As a contact," I said, "not as a joint holder. There's a difference. You can call the bank and ask them." "We did call the bank," my uncle said. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, the way people unfold things when they want you to watch them do it. He set it on the table and smoothed it flat with his palm. "This is a copy of the transaction history," he said. "Every withdrawal was made from the branch on Morse Road, in person, with a secondary ID." I stared at the paper from across the table. I didn't move toward it. Something in me understood, in a way I couldn't yet name, that the moment I touched that paper was the moment I accepted being part of whatever this was. "I've never been to that branch," I said. "I live in Nashville. I've lived in Nashville for 6 years. I came home for the funeral, and I came home now. That's it." "The teller remembers a young man," my uncle said, "about your age, about your height." "That's not evidence," I said. "That's a description of half the men in Columbus." "Ethan." My mother's voice, finally. She was looking at me now, but the expression on her face was not the one I knew. It was something carefully arranged, something that had been practiced. "We're not accusing you, we just want to understand." "It sounds like an accusation," I said. "We just want to know where the money went," Derek said. "So do I said, "because I didn't take it." Nobody said anything. Renee picked up her phone and turned it over once and set it back down. My aunt, who had been standing in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen for the last 3 minutes, quietly retreated. The children, who had crept back to the edge of the hallway, disappeared again. I drove back to the hotel that night. I had stopped staying in the family house the year before, for reasons that had seemed small at the time but were starting to feel larger. And I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to reconstruct everything I knew. My father had opened the account 11 years ago. It was a simple savings account at a regional bank, the kind of place with a drive-through and a community bulletin board in the lobby. He had kept it separate from his checking account because he believed in having money that was quiet, money that didn't get spent because it wasn't in the way of everything else. He called it his rainy day fund, though in the last few years I suspected it had become something more, an inheritance he was building slowly and without fanfare, because my father was a man who expressed love through logistics. He had mentioned the account to me exactly twice, once when he asked me to help him check the balance on his phone, once 8 months before he died, when he called me on a Tuesday evening and said, almost casually, that he had been thinking about the future and that he wanted to make sure certain things were in order. I had assumed he meant a will. I had encouraged him to talk to an attorney. He had said he would think about it. I did not know if he ever did. The next morning, I went to the bank on Morse Road. The branch manager was a woman named Patricia, who had the brisk, practiced warmth of someone who had been delivering bad news to grieving families for longer than she wanted to think about. She looked at my ID. She looked at the account number I had written on a piece of hotel stationery. She disappeared into the back for 11 minutes. When she came back, she sat down across from me and folded her hands on the desk. "I can't give you account details without authorization from the estate," she said. "I'm sure you understand. I'm not asking for details," I said. "I'm asking whether you can confirm that my name is associated with this account in any capacity beyond what I believe it to be." She looked at me for a moment. "I can tell you that the account is flagged," she said. "Beyond that, I'd recommend you speak with an attorney." "It's flagged," I said. "I can't say more than that." I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a long time after that. Flagged. The account was flagged. That meant someone had already raised a concern. Someone had already made a call, filed something, started something. Before the Christmas dinner, before my uncle pulled out his folded paper, before my mother arranged her face into that careful expression and said, "We just want to understand." This had been in motion before I arrived. I thought about my brother. Derek was 3 years older than me, an operations manager at a logistics company, the kind of person who scheduled his emotions the way other people schedule meetings. He had married Renee 7 years ago, and Renee was a woman of absolute certainty, certain about where to eat, certain about how to raise her kids, certain about who in the family was useful and who was not. I had fallen into the second category somewhere around the time I moved to Nashville and stopped being available for the things they needed me for. I thought about the withdrawals, 6 of them, over 14 months. Each one in person. Each one in person. Each one at this branch. Each one using a secondary ID. My ID had never left my possession. But my information, my name, my date of birth, my address, the last 4 digits of my social security number, that was different. That was the kind of information that sits in filing cabinets. That lives in old tax documents. That exists in the kind of paperwork that piles up in a family home over decades, in folders that nobody thinks to lock because nobody imagines a reason to. I drove back to my parents' house. My mother was home alone. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes by hand the way she always did, even though the dishwasher worked fine, and she turned when she heard me come in but didn't say anything. "I need to see Dad's filing cabinet," I said. "Ethan, I'm not asking to take anything, I just need to look." She dried her hands. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and let me pass. My father's office was a small room off the hallway, barely big enough for a desk and a filing cabinet and the bookshelves he had built himself out of 2x4s and plywood when I was in elementary school. It smelled like him still, that particular combination of coffee and sawdust and whatever brand of hand lotion he had used for as long as I could remember. The filing cabinet was a 4-drawer metal unit, gray, unlocked. I opened the top drawer. The folders were labeled in my father's handwriting: taxes, insurance, medical, auto, house. I moved through them carefully, not removing anything, just scanning the labels and the visible edges of documents. In the third drawer, between a folder labeled Utilities and one labeled Miscellaneous, there was a folder that had no label at all. Inside it were 7 envelopes. All of them were addressed to me. My name, my Nashville address, written in my father's handwriting. All of them postmarked between January of last year and the July before he died. All of them unopened. All of them stamped, returned to sender in red, except the last one, which had no return stamp. Just a small handwritten notation in the corner that I didn't recognize and couldn't immediately read. I stood in my father's office holding 7 letters he had written to me that I had never received, and I understood, in the specific and clarifying way that only betrayal can teach you, exactly what had happened. My father had been trying to tell me something. For 7 months, he had been writing letters, not emails. My father didn't trust email for things that mattered, but actual letters sent to my actual address. And every one of them had come back, except they hadn't come back to him. They had ended up here, in this drawer, in this unlocked cabinet, in this house where my brother still had a key, and visited every Sunday for dinner. I took photos of every envelope. I took photos of the postmarks, the addresses, the return stamps. I took a photo of the handwritten notation on the last envelope, which I could now read clearly. It said, "Hold for D. Derek." I left the house without speaking to my mother again. I called a Nashville attorney I had worked with 2 years earlier on a contract dispute. A man named Victor Greer, who had the particular gift of being completely unimpressed by everything, which in my experience was the most valuable quality an attorney could have. I told him what I had found. I told him about the account, the withdrawals, the bank visit, the letters, the notation. He was quiet for a moment. "Don't touch anything else in that house," he said. "I already left," I said. "Good. I'm going to make some calls. In the meantime, I need you to write down every interaction you've had with your brother and his wife in the last 18 months. Dates, what was said, who was present, everything." "You think they opened a fraudulent account in my name," I said. "I think," Victor said carefully, "that someone used your personal information to make withdrawals from your father's account while establishing a paper trail that pointed at you. Whether that involved a fraudulent ID, an inside arrangement with a teller, or something else, I don't know yet. But the letter situation is significant. If someone was intercepting your mail and physically returning it from inside the house, that's a federal matter." I sat with that for a moment. Federal. "He was sick," I said. "My dad. He was trying to tell me something, and he couldn't reach me because someone was making sure he couldn't." "Write everything down," Victor said. "I'll call you tomorrow morning." What followed was 6 weeks that I can only describe as the experience of watching a floor you thought was solid slowly reveal itself to be made of paper. Victor moved quickly and quietly. He contacted the bank's fraud department. He filed a request with the Postal Service regarding the returned mail. He reached out to an investigator he trusted, a former county sheriff's deputy named Marcus, who had the kind of patience that made other people uncomfortable. Marcus found the teller. She was 26 years old, had worked at the Morse Road branch for 3 years, and had quietly resigned 2 months after the last withdrawal. Her resignation had been abrupt and without explanation. Marcus found her through her former supervisor, who remembered her because she had been, in his words, very close with a regular customer. A man who came in often, always on weekday mornings, always friendly, always tipped his hat. Marcus showed her a photo lineup. She identified Derek without hesitation. She had not known, she said, that what she was doing was illegal. She had believed, because she had been told, that the man she was helping was the account holder's son, assisting with withdrawals that the account holder himself was too unwell to make in person. She had been shown what appeared to be a notarized letter of authorization. She had recorded the transactions as third-party assisted withdrawals, which was an internal process the branch used for elderly customers. The notarized letter was fake. The notary seal had been purchased online. The signature on the letter was not my father's. Victor filed with the district attorney's office on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, Derek had hired an attorney. The confrontation I had imagined, the dramatic moment in the living room where everything comes out, never happened the way I had pictured it. Real consequences are quieter than that. They arrive in the form of certified letters and calendar invitations and phone calls where people speak very carefully because they know someone might be taking notes. But there was one moment, It was in January, 2 weeks after the DA's office opened a formal investigation. My mother called and asked me to come to the house. She said she wanted to talk, just the two of us. I went because she was my mother and because some part of me still needed to hear her say it out loud. She was in the living room when I arrived, sitting in the chair that had always been my father's chair, which I thought was either unconscious or deliberate, and I couldn't decide which was worse. I didn't know about the letters, she said. But you knew something, I said. She looked at her hands. Derek told me you had borrowed money from your father and hadn't paid it back. He said your father was too soft to say anything, and that the withdrawals were just your father giving you what he was going to give you anyway. And you believed that. I wanted things to be simple, she said. I was grieving. I didn't want to look too closely. He was writing me letters, Mom, for 7 months. He was trying to tell me something, and you had a cabinet full of proof, and you didn't look too closely. She didn't have an answer for that. I hadn't expected one. What my father had been trying to tell me, Victor eventually reconstructed from the final letter. The one without a return stamp. The one marked hold for D. The one that had apparently been kept back from the return pile. Possibly by accident or possibly because even Derek had limits. Was this? My father had found out. Sometime in the spring of the year he died, he had noticed the balance dropping and had gone into the branch and had been told about the third-party withdrawals, the letter of authorization, the signature. He had known immediately that something was wrong. He had gone home. He had not confronted Derek directly, because my father was not a man who confronted people directly when he could document things instead. He had started writing to me. He had written 7 letters laying out everything he had found, everything he suspected, and what he wanted me to do. He had also, in that final letter, enclosed a document. It was a handwritten amendment to his will, witnessed and signed by 2 of his neighbors, both of whom were still alive, and both of whom confirmed to Victor that they had signed exactly what they were told they were signing, on the date written, in full view of each other. The amendment left his house, a 3-bedroom on a 1/4 acre in a neighborhood that had become significantly more valuable over the last decade. To me, not equally split, not to the family, to me. He had written 1 line of explanation below the bequest, because you are the one who will not let things stay crooked. The case took 11 months to resolve. Derek pleaded to a reduced charge, felony theft by deception, plus wire fraud, in exchange for full restitution and cooperation with the bank's civil recovery process. Renee filed for divorce 4 months into the investigation, which surprised no one who had been paying attention. The teller entered a deferred prosecution agreement contingent on her testimony and restitution from her portion of what she had received. The house transferred to me in the fall. I drove to Dayton for the closing. It was a Tuesday, overcast, the trees just starting to go. I signed the paperwork in a title company office that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee, and when it was done, I drove to the house and sat in the driveway for a while. I thought about my father writing 7 letters. I thought about him going to the bank, seeing the numbers, understanding immediately what was happening, and choosing not to rage about it but to document it, to write it down, to put it in an envelope and send it to me, methodically, month after month. Even when the letters came back, he had kept sending them. He had not assumed I wasn't reading them. He had not assumed I didn't care. He had kept going, because he believed, the way he had always believed, that if you kept doing the right thing consistently enough, it would eventually arrive. The last letter arrived, just not the way either of us expected. I go back to the house on weekends now. I have been fixing it up slowly. The back fence, the gutters, a section of flooring in the hallway that had been soft for years and that my father had always meant to get to. I work on it the way he worked on things, without hurrying, without an audience. My mother calls occasionally. Our conversations are short and careful. I do not know yet what shape that relationship will take. Some things take longer to know than others. What I know is this. My father believed in quiet documents. He believed in neighbors who would stand in a driveway and sign their names on a piece of paper because a man they respected asked them to. He believed in sending the letter again even when it came back. He taught me that the truth does not always arrive on time, but when it is written down, witnessed, and sent with the right intention, it tends to arrive eventually. I am still learning what he knew, but I have the house, and I have the letter, and I know now that he never stopped trying to reach me. That is enough. For now, that is more than enough.